Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. It seems that we all survived the storm. It's pretty outside, so pretty amazing. I am Adriana Larrota, Director of Media Relations at America Society and the Council of the Americas, and it is my pleasure to welcome everyone here this morning, as well as those who are joining through our webcast. We are delighted to have with us Alejandro Eder, who is the Director of the Colombian Agency for Reintegration. It is particularly relevant to have Alejandro here today as Colombia approaches the possibility of ending 5 decades of armed conflict. Alejandro Eder was appointed as Director of the agency by the President of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, with the aim of being a spokesman for the reintegration policy and an advisor on the structuring and developing of this initiative. Eder has been working with the agency for the past 7 years, and prior to that, he worked in the private sector here in New York, in Wall Street, I understand, and also in Colombia. A Hamilton College graduate, Alejandro Eder has a master's degree in international relations, security policy, and conflict resolution from Columbia University. We will ask Alejandro to give us an overview of where the reintegration process stands today, and then we will have a conversation, and he will take some questions from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Alejandro Eder. You prefer to speak?
Whatever you prefer. However you prefer. How would you prefer to begin?
I prefer you to give us a few words.
A brief? All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much. And thank you for having me again. I was here last year. If you like, I'll give a brief presentation about our work in Colombia as far as disarming and reintegrating members of illegal armed group goes. And then I guess we can have a conversation. So in Colombia, for the past 11 years, we've been implementing a policy to disarm and demobilize members of illegal armed groups from all bands. We've demobilized over 57,000 people, 35,000 from former AUC groups, from illegal right-wing paramilitary groups, and 22,000 from guerrilla groups. Every day in Colombia, 5 people are demobilizing daily. They're mostly from the illegal group of the FARC, but we also have people coming out from the ELN. Last year alone, 1,400 people demobilized, 1,100 from the FARC and 300 from the ELN. And in total, we've had almost 17,000 people demobilized from the, over 17,000, over 18,000 actually demobilized from the FARC, and about 3,000 or 4,000 from the ELN. So in Colombia, we've gathered a lot of experience in the past few years with how to handle these people. It's a very difficult population or group of people to work with. Just to give you an idea, out of the 1,400 people that demobilized last year, 45% came out and they were completely illiterate. 30% of those who came out were functionally literate, which means that they could read or write their names, and that's about it. 90% had some sort of psychological trauma. 20% required clinical psychological attention to tend to that trauma. The average recruitment age is 12 years old, and the average amount of time spent in these groups is 14 years. So these are people who have been in these groups from the age of 12 to the age of 26 on average. I've met people who went into the FARC as young as 6 or 7 or 8 years old. Usually they get a machine gun in their hands by the age of 8 or by the age of 9 when they're recruited that young, and by a machine gun I mean an AK-47. So it's a very difficult population to work with, because since so many of them have left since such a young age and for such a long time, that means that they don't have any social networks in legality. That means that they usually don't have a safety net of like family members or friends that they can fall back on, so that when they demobilize, it's not only difficult to stabilize the person psychologically and emotionally and educationally, but also it's very hard to stabilize them in society, because they need to rebuild those social networks. Usually what happens when somebody's taken from such a young age is that their family will shun them, because even though the family is very sad when the person leaves, when they come back, they don't know what that person did while they were in the illegal armed group. So it becomes kind of like a shame. So we have to do a lot of work with families, the families that they left behind, but also the families that they're building, the new families, you know, people that life moves on, they get married, they actually intermarry as well. We have members of paramilitary groups that have married members of guerrilla groups. We have members of paramilitary groups that have married displaced persons and members of guerrilla groups as well. So after a while, life moves on and people start to integrate, not just to reintegrate. And the way the process works in general is that when people first demobilize, they spend about 2 to 3 months in government halfway houses. During their time in these halfway houses, they go through a certification process. It's a certification, an interagency certification process, which is led by the Ministry of Defense, but it counts with the involvement and participation of different government agencies, including the Reintegration Agency, the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace, the Ministry of the Interior, the Ministry of Justice, the Public Defender's Office, and the Attorney General's Office, the Fiscalía in Spanish. And each case is reviewed one by one to determine whether the person actually did belong into these groups and whether this person has any outstanding warrants for having committed crimes against humanity. If they do have any outstanding warrants, they cannot come into this program. They need to go to prison, essentially, the way it stands today. Before, people were able to go to the Justice and Peace law. That is no longer an option. Today, people who have violated crimes against humanity, just because there's no transitional justice mechanism currently, they must face the full extent of their crimes and, I guess, the punishment of their crimes. When people are certified, however, that they were ex-combatants, then they come into this program. Just to be clear, in Colombia, there's 2 ways in which people can demobilize from armed groups. There's what's known as a collective demobilization, which is when there's peace talks with an illegal armed group and everybody comes out together after an agreement is struck. And then there's individual demobilizations. Individual demobilizations is when a member of an illegal armed group takes it upon him or herself to leave this group and to seek the reintegration program. That's the difference between the 2 types of demobilizations. Today in Colombia, we're currently carrying out an individual demobilization program. If the peace talks with the FARC and if someday we have peace talks with the ELN, if those come to a successful end, then hopefully they too will collectively demobilize. But the way that it works in Colombia today is that the individual disarmament and demobilization program, or process rather, is managed by the Ministry of Defense, and the collective disarmament and demobilization process is managed by the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace. But what that means is that they'll take care of the initial part, and they both have to certify ex-combatants as being legitimately ex-combatants. And once people are certified, they can all come to this reintegration program, to the one that's managed by the Colombian Agency for Reintegration, by the ACR. Regardless of what group or what type of demobilization the person went through, they all go into the same reintegration program. And during that program, what we do is the first thing that we have to do is we need to stabilize people psychologically and emotionally. That can take, on average, 2 to 3 years per person, on average. Like I said, 90% of people come out with psychological traumas, and that's not so different than from other people coming from conflict situations. If you look at soldiers coming home from Iraq or from Afghanistan, there's a high level of post-traumatic stress disorder, and those are people coming back from after having served in the U.S. Army. Imagine what it must be like after having been in the FARC or in the paramilitaries or in the ELN since you were a child. So it really is a very difficult task. Secondly, what we try to do is to educate everybody. In Colombia, as you know, is a middle income, it's a high level middle income country. So you need a minimal level of education to be able to get back into the workforce. You need to at least know how to read and write, but in reality, depending on the region of Colombia that you live in, you need a high school education if you live in one of the cities, or you would need at least a 5th grade education. So we take everybody through the 5th grade. We take about 96% of ex-combatants through the 5th grade. The 4% that we don't take it through the 5th grade, or who don't have that requirement, are people who are either senior citizens, because we have people who come out, at the age of 60 or at the age of 70, or people who have some sort of handicap or who are a chronic illness. There's ex-combatants that come out with AIDS, there's ex-combatants that come out with cancer, there's people who are paralyzed, people who are quadriplegic, people who don't have limbs. So those people, for them, we have a special reintegration route which focuses more specifically on getting them some income generation, so getting them back to work quickly, or finding a way for other government programs to take care of them. In case of, for example, quadriplegic persons, there's other government programs that can take care of them essentially for the rest of their lives. Once we get everybody through elementary school, most people, or about half of everybody, half of the people who get through elementary school will go on to go into high school or to finish high school. We also have a little less than 800 people that have gone on to college. They've studied everything from accounting to law to medicine, anthropology, psychology. As a matter of fact, at the ACR today, this is something that we started doing last year. After we hadn't started when I came here last year, but we're just starting the hiring process. But today we have 50 ex-combatants, reintegrated ex-combatants that are now working with us. About half of them are college graduates, half of them are psychologists, anthropologists, and social workers. The other ones are technicians, or they have technical training in social sciences, but they're now members of our team, and they're amongst our team of reintegration. We call them reintegration promoters, which is a special category that we made for them. We usually have reintegration professionals. That's what we call our team of psychologists and social workers that work directly, that have direct contact with ex-combatants. But they work as reintegration promoters, and they also have direct contact with the ex-combatants. The reason why they didn't go, we needed to create a special category for them, is because they don't have any work experience, or at least any legal work experience, which is a main challenge that they face when they go back into the workforce. When a 30-year-old shows up at a company and he's got a CV with no work experience whatsoever, they're not going to be as likely to hire that person. Usually they don't have, they do have work experience, but you can't have in your resume that you were in the FARC or in the paramilitaries. That's not the best way to get a job. Yeah. But in any case, we have people working for us now, and there's also working on our team rather. And also, when people are in the process, they also need to do work with communities. They need to do 80 hours of volunteer social service. That's mandatory for every ex-combatant. We also do additional work with immediate receptor communities with our team of reintegration professionals, and with ex-combatants, where we try to generate reconciliation spaces with people in the neighborhoods where they live, and also in the neighborhoods where we have service centers. Today we have service centers, 34 service centers nationwide. We have 34 service centers in 26 municipalities, or regional offices rather. We tend to the demobilized population in all 32 of Colombia's 32 provinces, and there's ex-combatants in 740 of Colombia's 1,100 municipalities. So ex-combatants are everywhere, and just to close off, I guess, this general introduction, a lot of people in the Colombian media ask me if Colombia is ready for when the ex-combatants arrive, when people start demobilizing, and the short answer to that is the ex-combatants have already arrived. They're already everywhere. Many of them are already reintegrated. So that's a big advantage that Colombia has today, is that we have over a decade of experience in working this subject matter.
I imagine most of the people that have participated in the program are like the rank and file. If the peace is signed, you will have the commanders, you will have the leadership. Do you have a plan for them to reintegrate as well?
I think that depends. It's not necessarily the case. I think whatever may happen in Havana remains to be seen. But if you look at our experience today, we work, yes, mostly with the rank and file, but there's also mid-level commanders. So when you look at an illegal organization, or at any organization, you'll usually have three levels: the highest level, then mid-level commanders, like the middle management, and then the rank and file. You need to differentiate the type of programs that you give to each person. That's a mistake, for example, that was made with the AUC demobilization, is that not enough attention was paid to the middle managers. And that didn't just happen with the AUC, that usually happens or it has happened in every single peace-building process in the world since modern DDR exists in 1990. So what happens is that if you don't take care of the middle managers, who are the ones who know how to run the show and usually have leadership skills, it'll be more likely that they be unsatisfied with the deal that they'll get, and they might remain in criminal activity. So you have to have differentiated programs for each of those levels.
And you do have programs for those levels?
We have them to an extent, but it's different now because right now it's individual demobilizations. Right now what we try to do as well is that we identify people in the program who have extraordinary leadership qualities. And when we find people that have leadership qualities, we try to develop them in a positive way, because leaders can be leaders in good or they can be leaders in bad. So we need to make sure that we identify leaders, regardless of what their rank was, and make sure that we have them in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. I was reading statistics from your agency, and 71% of the people who has reintegrated have proper jobs. That's something you publicize. But I understand that finding jobs for them has been probably the most challenging aspect.
I think that the biggest strategic challenge that we have is the stigma that people still attach to the ex-combatants, and that's difficult not just for getting jobs, but also for reintegrating socially into their neighborhoods or into their communities. Because people tend to reject ex-combatants for simply being ex-combatants. That happens a lot in the private sector as well, and I don't say it, throwing blame on the private sector. I think it's also perfectly logical, because if you think about it, the private sector was victimized by illegal armed groups. It's private sector company owners who have been kidnapped, companies that have been extorted, companies that have suffered terrorism if they don't pay extortions. So I think it's normal that people be reluctant to take that step. But that's something that we're trying to change by working with different private sector companies and different trade guilds, trying to get people to better understand the process. But it's very lengthy. We've been doing this now for 10 years, and still the reluctance to give ex-combatants a chance is still very high. However, as you said, of 32,000 people that are in the program today, we have an estimated employment rate of around 72%, which is not that bad at all. But the fact of the matter is that most of those people are working without their bosses or their coworkers knowing that they're ex-combatants. So unfortunately, what ends up happening is that when they're discovered, quote unquote, they lose their jobs. And that's, we receive on average 3 complaints daily at our call center, just our call center, from ex-combatants who have lost their jobs because they've been discovered, so to speak, as being ex-combatants. So I think that, again, that's the greatest challenge that we have, but it's not just the private sector, it's Colombia in general, that we need to find ways to change the image. And it's very hard because, one of the main reasons, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is that there's an ongoing conflict in Colombia. So, if you have the FARC that's placing bombs and the criminal bands that are doing terrible things, and then we're asking companies or society give ex-combatants a chance, and there's a mixed message, which is, well, why? These guys are doing all these bad things. People still don't differentiate between the two. And then the other thing is that it's difficult because people, I guess they don't really understand.
It wouldn't be the same if someone has a judicial past. Once the person applies to a job, it will be asked if it has some.
Yes, but that really hasn't, because again, out of 32,000 people, 72% are working. Most of them are doing so without their bosses knowing. And many of them, about half of those that are working, are in the private sector. So they've been getting jobs. I've had many experiences, 3 times actually, where I've been in restaurants. Once it was the sommelier, the wine expert, was recommending a wine, and then he leaned over and whispered into my ear, "Hi, I'm an ex-combatant." And another time, a waiter simply told me that he was an ex-combatant as well, a waiter that was serving me. And not so long ago, in November of last year, I was at a hotel chain, U.S. hotel chain in Cali, And one of the cooks came out of the kitchen and said that he was an ex-combatant and that he was very scared that he was going to be discovered and that he was going to lose his job. So I helped him actually I spoke with the hotel's general director, and I told her that an ex-combatant had approached me and that he worked amongst her staff. She got very scared. I could see it clearly on her face that it was fear. And I explained to her not to be scared. I explained to her how the program worked. I asked her to please not fire this person before first seeing our program and understanding what it is that we do. So she got her whole team, her whole staff, like directorate staff, and we took them to one of our service centers. She met with our team. They showed her how the program works. And what we found is, or what we have found is that once people realize how rigorous the process is and that we're doing a serious job, people start to lose fear because it's a mitigating factor. You know, it's not people in their minds, they think, people come out of the jungle and they go straight into the workplace. That's not the case. The other factor, which I was going to say that continues to promote the stigma, is that quite frankly, and I've said this to the media doesn't help, because the only news are bad news. So it's not news when you have an ex-combatant who started a company 4 years ago and today he generates 150 jobs and is making a lot of money. But it is news when you have an ex-combatant that's captured because he killed his girlfriend or because he was in a gang stealing cars or whatever. They'll say, you know, a gang was dismantled in Bogota and one member was a desmobilizado. And then so everybody in their minds, they're like, oh, all right, all the desmovilizados are crooks. I think that we don't need to sugarcoat things. I mean, we need to be very clear that the ex-combatants or the demobilized persons were members of illegal terrorist groups. There's no other way of putting it. They participated in terrible things, but they're people who have been rehabilitated, and most of them, almost 76% of them, remain in legality.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess take us to also the point of reconciliation. That is a word that I see more often in Colombia now, because it's you do your job convincing people, like evangelizing constantly about the importance of this process. But somehow another piece that needs to be in place is the reconciliation of the entire country. So you don't have to convince a particular employer to not fire an employee that is a former combatant, but there is a commitment of the entire country in reconcile. However, that's very hard.
Without reconciliation, there can be no peace. And I think that people, sometimes they don't understand what reconciliation means, but reconciliation essentially is agreeing to coexist with your adversary or your victimizer or your enemy, you know, and it's not, reconciliation is not the same thing as forgiveness. You don't need to forgive to reconcile. But you do need reconciliation to be able to move towards forgiveness. You know, you don't necessarily need forgiveness for peace, for there to be peace. But you do need reconciliation. And one of the problems with reconciliation, the way it works in the world today, is that it's become completely politicized. And people have politicized the difference between a victim and a victimizer. So in Colombia, not just in Colombia, in other post-conflict countries, you see many NGOs and international agencies and even governments that are promoting reconciliation programs with only victims or with only victimizers, you know, keeping both populations separated. But you can't reconcile with yourself. You need to reconcile with whomever did you harm. So I think that, and you need to and part of a reconciliation process, for example, is giving someone who was in these groups a chance, giving them a chance to come back to society, giving them a chance to have a job. You know, so I think those are the people that we need to reconcile with. And if you want peace, you need to reconciliate. That's the price of peace, and it's not a very steep price for what you're going to get.
And who is leading in Colombia that part of the peace building effort? Is part of your agency, or is
in Colombia, unfortunately, it's still divided amongst many agencies. In our agency, we do a lot of reconciliation work, because if we don't do reconciliation work, reintegration is impossible. So we work a lot with local communities, with receptor communities, with victims groups, and we've done it with quite a bit of success. to the point where victims groups are the type of civil society organizations that are the closest to our process. And that goes against some mainstream victim advocacy groups who think that, no, that's absurd and that you can't bring victims and victimizers together. You can't not. That's the way you reconcile. That's the way you build peace. There are other agencies like the Victims Unit in Colombia, which is an agency that focuses on repairing and taking care of victims. They also do reconciliation work, and we work closely with them to generate spaces for where reconciliation can take place.
Mm-hmm. And you yourself, your family was victim of violence. You left Colombia at some point. You have been told that you are a returnee because you went back to...
I was labeled as a returnee by a UN official, and I never thought of it that way, but I guess he's right. But I mean, like many other Colombians, I think in Colombia, every family has in some way or another been touched by violence, and I think that in Colombia, we're turning the tide, and things have been changing just because the levels of violence were intolerable, and they just touched everyone. So that's the way that you end a situation like this, is by facing it.
I don't know if I may mention a member of your family, your grandfather was the first person in Colombia that was kidnapped and killed historically. That was 50 years ago.
That was 50 years ago in March of 1965. My grandfather was kidnapped and killed by the FARC.
And then you really have lived that in your life, and you reconcile. How did you reconcile yourself personally? Where did you find the resources inside you?
I think
did you forgive?
I don't know if, I think, I don't know if, that's a good question. I don't know if I've forgiven. I didn't live it. That happened 10 years before I was born, but my family lived it. And I've suffered other things since. But my family has been victimized, was victimized afterwards as well, rather. But I think you need to move beyond it, and you need to realize that it's bigger than your own. Peace is bigger than your own problem. It's something that needs to be achieved for the greater good of society, and you can't just focus, oh, I've been wronged, and then that's it. No, you need to change it so that people stop being wronged.
I would like to turn now to the efforts that Colombia is doing in terms of international cooperation. That it's something that brought you here to the U.S. So I would like you to explain why it's important for Colombia to harness that support, and what support are you looking for?
Well, Colombia, as far as our peace building and security know-how, Colombia has become very developed in the past decade, because when we took it upon ourselves to really, again, change the tide in Colombia, we had to develop a special set of skills. And today, Colombia has become a provider to the world of those skills. It's clear in the security sector, where Colombian police officers and Colombian soldiers and the Colombian armed forces are training other Latin American countries and even some African countries on how to become better policemen, or how to become better armed forces, more professional armed forces. But we're also doing that in the peace building field. In Colombia, this policy started in its modern phase 11 years ago, and in those 11 years we've modernized and we've evolved quite a bit. We have what's today considered by many to be the best reintegration program ever in the modern era of DDR, which again started in 1990 at the end of the Cold War. But it's a program that's been developed mostly with Colombian funds. Since 2006, over almost $669 million have been invested in Colombia's reintegration program, just the reintegration program, out of which 630.5 million were from the Colombian Treasury. That means that 94% of the cost of this program has been fielded by the Colombian government, which is very important because it means it's a Colombian solution to a Colombian problem. And that's what you try to look for in these types of situations. If you look at it from an international perspective, what donor countries are usually trying to achieve is that there be national ownership of conflict resolution or of solving these types of problems. In Colombia, we've done that, and in Colombia, there's a lot of national ownership, but there is a drawback to national ownership, and that's that if a solution to a problem is too nationally owned, you don't have the benefit of learning from other international experience. What I mean by that is that currently in the world, there's 25 DDR processes, around 25, including the Colombian process, and our process is the only process that's managed by the host country. All other processes are managed by the international community, be it by the UN or by the World Bank. And the benefit that those countries have is that they can exchange experiences and lessons learned from one country to the next. We haven't had that benefit because we've been doing it ourselves. So one of the things that we've been doing for the past 5 years is that we've engaged in a very aggressive South-South technical cooperation strategy, where we've approached other countries with DDR programs and other international organizations that implement DDR programs so that we can exchange experiences, so that we can learn from each other. We've invited people from over 3 or 4 dozen countries to Colombia to see what we're doing as far as DDR goes, and we've sent Colombian technicians to at least 4 other countries so that we can learn from them, but also teach them what we're doing. And it's been very important because we've managed to build a network of DDR practitioners. Last winter, for example, in November, which was summer in Santa Marta, Colombia, which is always summer in Santa Marta, Colombia, but it was in November of last year, we had a DDR Directors Summit in Santa Marta. We had it at the Hacienda San Pedro de Alejandrino, which is the hacienda where Simón Bolívar died in 1831, and if I remember correctly, and we had a summit there with different DDR directors, and those spaces are always very important because there are other people that are doing these types of programs, and a lot of times this usually happens in developing or underdeveloped countries, is that we fail to look horizontally. We're constantly looking up, and I think it's very important to be able to manage this with a private sector mentality. And by private sector, I mean, where did this idea come from? I used to be an investment banker, and I used to work in corporate finance. And whenever we were going to acquire a new business, we did 2 things. First, we did comps to look at other companies that were in similar sectors to see how they behaved. And then if you were going to acquire the company, you do at least 1 year or 2 years of due diligence. So you need to get in touch with other countries so we can start comparing and learning from each other, but you also need to do a due diligence and go out there and learn, not just me or my advisors from my office, but my practitioners who actually work in the field. They need to be able to go out and look at other experiences and broaden their horizons and learn from different countries.
And when you see successful experiences, do you look at, I don't know, Northern Ireland or even South Africa?
We look at everything. We look not just at DDR, because reintegration programs exist for ex-combatants, but they also exist for returnees, for refugees that are going home. Reintegration programs exist for political asylum seekers in the US and in Canada and in the European Union. Reintegration programs exist for victims of natural disasters. So we looked at all different types of reintegration programs to see what bits and pieces we can draw from each problem. There's not one specific case that you can look at, but you need to look at all of them and you need to pick and choose from different parts. All cases are different. There's also another integration program which has been quite similar to the type of work that we do in Colombia, and that's the work that the government of South Korea does with North Korean refugees, which is very much focused on psychological attention, on working closely with local authorities, with private sector, dealing with people who have a lot of traumas, who are learning to live in a new society. So there's a lot of similarities. So you really have to really develop this program, you need to think out of the box, and you need to try to find similar things to see how you tie it down and how you find the best solution.
Mentioning also budget, you say Colombia doesn't really take aid in terms.
We take it if it's there to be taken, okay. But we don't. It's not
we
critical.
Been offered?
Of course, no. Last year alone, we received $4 million in aid, mostly from the U.S. But last year, our budget was $90 million, so it's $94 million, including foreign aid. So it's mostly Colombian funds, and that's okay. You know, we have the, you know, if we stop receiving international aid, this isn't going to collapse, and that's the important part. But at the same time, and also we don't, when I'm a firm believer in that you shouldn't take aid if you don't need it, because it's just wasting other people's money, and it's money that could go elsewhere. So what we try to do is we try to focus the aid that we do get into what we really need. And essentially what we need, or what we've been using it for, is for technological development and for strengthening the institution that's implementing the program. Because you need to have a strong institutional framework to carry out a program like this, because you need to have the operational and the political muscle to move other government agencies. And also you just need to keep on refining the work that we do, because it can always be better. It can always be better.
Now, if the peace is signed in Havana, this will be a completely different scenario. Do you have the funds? Where do they come from? Is that money already being put aside?
I think I mean, I'd rather not speculate about what may or may not happen in Havana, but I would only say two things. The first one is that Colombia has 11 years of experience doing this, and it's very important that we take advantage of that experience so that we can make sure that we close this conflict off right. I think people sometimes think that a peace process is just signing a piece of paper after a negotiation. That's the easy part. The hard part is implementing peace, and it's something that usually will last 10 or 15 years. And in the case of reintegration, it'll take a full generation or 2 full generations. Why? Because people who are demobilizing today are on average 24 years old. That means that they're going to be with us for the next 50 or 60 or maybe even some 70 years. You know, so this is something that we're going to have to deal with for the rest of, at least of my life. We're going to have to, this is going to be a reality in Colombian society. And the second thing that I would like to point out is that reintegrating people is not that expensive. It costs $2,500 per person on average for a duration of 7 years. So it's $2,500 per person per year for a duration of 7 years. So it's about, I don't know, $17,000 or $18,000 to reintegrate someone who's come out of one of these groups. If you compare that to fighting a guerrilla in the jungle, it's significantly less expensive. I wouldn't even want to calculate how much it costs, but it could be as much as $200,000 or $250,000 per capita to fight a guerrilla in the jungle every year. And it's also less expensive than throwing someone in jail. The cost of having someone in a Colombian prison is $8,000 per person per year, and there's a recidivism rate of 70%. The cost of this program is $2,500 per person per year. That's the direct cost of this agency. If you add on to that the expenditures that other ministries and other agencies make to reintegrate people, you know, for the education and healthcare, et cetera, could go up to maybe $5,000 or $6,000. And we have a success rate an estimated success rate of around 76%. So that means that at a lower cost, we're achieving results that are almost 3 times better.
Success rate.
In other words, people that stay in legality.
So they don't go back.
They don't go back to any sort of criminal activity.
The budget for reintegration comes from the defense budget? Would it be?
This agency is part of the Colombian the presidency of the Republic in Colombia, and it's funds that come from the Ministry of the Treasury. They come straight into the program. They're not defense funds.
And how many people will you be looking to reintegrate if all the groups that are outlaws?
Again, I don't want to speculate, but I will. but we know that there's around 7,200 armed FARC combatants, and there's around 1,500 armed ELN combatants. You need to demobilize them, plus whatever support structures they have, which could make those numbers larger.
Before I turn the microphone over to the audience, I want to insist, and you will tell me again, you won't speculate, but I think it's in everybody's mind to know if you are hopeful for the process.
I'm hopeful, but I also think that, and I think, and I believe that the way that President Santos has undertaken this initiative it's very intelligent, and it's very likely that it'll be a formula for success, not at any price. I think it'll be at the right price, so that it won't compromise our democracy. or our values in Colombia. But I also think that it's a very tough process, and I also think that if it were to end without success, I think that it's only a matter of time before these illegal movements end in Colombia. Like I said, last year we had 1,400 people demobilized. That's 20% more than in 2013. And in January of this year, we had almost 150 people demobilized, which is 46% more than January 2013. So that means demobilizations are increasing. We could expect as many as 2,000 to 2,400 demobilizations this year if that demobilization rate is kept up, and that means that slowly they're losing their people. Colombia is a very different country today than what it was in 1965 or 64 when these groups emerged. Colombia is a country which in the past 10 years has seen its GDP grow twofold or threefold. It's a country where in the past 10 years, 10 million people have moved from the lower class into the middle class. It's a country which is developing new regions of the country that are now developable because they've been retaken back from illegal armed groups. It's a country that's changing as we speak. And people who enter these groups are also seeing that. If you can live a life in legality, getting paid a fair wage and having a home and being with your family, why not do that instead of being in the jungle, being run around by the armed forces who every day are more and more effective, and risk losing your life over nothing. There's no revolution going on in Colombia. The revolution that's going on in Colombia is happening through democracy and through the development of our economy.
And the pace of the mobilization you see is picking up. So
we see it picking up for the first time in 3 years, and which is significant also because proportionally the FARC are smaller today and the ELN are smaller today than they were a few years ago. So the fact that it's picking up, it means that proportionally they're losing more people. I've seen recently I was at a halfway house where new arrivals get there, and we had something like 14 or 18 people from a single FARC front. Each front is made up of between 100 or 200 people. So if you have 18 people come out of one single front, that's a significant blow. And what that does is to the people that are left behind, is that leaves them wondering, why? What are we doing? Why is everybody leaving? And then that just continues to demoralize them and to move us in the right direction.
Okay. I would like to open the floor for questions. I only ask you to identify yourselves. Yeah, I have a question here.
My name is Martha Dalton. I'm from the United Nations. Acknowledging that you don't want to speculate, you mentioned that there's two ways to demobilize individuals voluntarily and then as a group. And I wondered what kind of changes would have to be made in your approach to DMOPR if you were to take responsibility for the FARC, which would soon will be demobilizing as a group.
I think that would depend on how many people would come out and where they would come out. But I think that the biggest change that we would need to prepare for, more than the R, would be in how the DD is handled. Because, but I mean also the R. I think in general it would just be we would have to do something which we haven't done for almost a decade, which is to take in large numbers of people in one shot. In getting a steady flow of 100 or 150 demobilized persons per month, it's something that's completely manageable. But getting 5,000 or in 1 month, or 10,000 or 15,000, that's a whole different story, as you well know in the UN.
My name is David Campagna. My wife is Alejandro's aunt.
And you're my uncle.
When these individuals come out of the jungle without does the group have consequences if they know they're contemplating this? And secondly, how do they get the idea that they can go to people?
Well, the idea they get it from the armed forces. There's a very, very effective communication campaign aimed at active combatants, and they do it through radio commercials, the radio shows through army radio stations, TV commercials, and even by throwing flyers out in the jungle in areas where they know that the guerrillas are, telling them what the benefits are if they demobilize. So that's the way that we get the message out. But also there's another way in which we're getting the message out, and which is word of mouth. A lot of the people who have come out, they still have family members or friends or cousins or partners that are living in the jungle, and they usually get calls from them and to ask them, yo, so is it real? Were you tortured? Were you killed? And they'll tell them the truth. No, you know, we're here, we're studying, we're going to the psychologist, it's great. Just to give you an idea of how effective the word of mouth is, we did a survey with the ex-combatants that are in the process today, and we asked them, we did like a client satisfaction survey, and we asked them different questions, and some of the answers that they gave us were that 91% of them say that their lives are better off today than when they were in the illegal armed group. 87.4% of them said that they would recommend this program to people who are going to demobilize, which is huge. That's like, if you have 87.4% of your clients recommending your product, you know, that's the formula to win. And 86% of them said that they were very or extremely satisfied with the service that they were receiving. So that's also one of the elements that helps to get people to feel more comfortable coming out, is that we're coming through on our promises. Then to your other question, yes, there are repercussions when ex-combatants demobilize from the FARC or from the ELN. They become what those groups call military targets, so they try to hunt them down to assassinate them, essentially, to kill them. And unfortunately, that does happen quite a bit. That's one of the big problems that we have, particularly with people who have been demobilized for less than a year. That's the most dangerous moment in their lives in freedom, is that first year, because that's when the group still tries to chase them down. But they're losing so many people that they just can't really get to everybody. In any case, homicide is a big problem, not just because they're persecuted by FARC and ELN, but also by spoiler groups that emerged after the AUC demobilized, which are called Bakrim, criminal bands. They also have chased ex-combatants down, trying to forcibly recruit them, because these are people who have a set of skills that they require. So that's one of the biggest challenges, is making sure that everybody's secure.
I've seen a question. Yeah.
Well, my name is Juan Marquez. I'm from Bogotá, Colombia. Thank you. Well, in the last couple of weeks, we have heard that the national police has discovered like an illegal office from the Colombian army that was trying to do some intelligence and, you know, listening conversations from the negotiation team, including you. So what do you think, well, who do you think is behind that, and what do you think is the purpose of that? Like,
I'd rather not speculate. That's being investigated by the authorities. We should just wait and see what happens.
great.
Yes.
My name is Rachel Fagiano. I'm with the Tinker Foundation, and I was wondering how you handle demobilized individuals that return to families which are geographically located in areas where there isn't economic opportunity, or economic opportunity is intrinsically linked to conflict.
It's a very good question, and it's the answer is that it's very difficult. Normally, what we try to do is that we try to incentivize individuals going to places where they can be reintegrated. You know, the problem is that you can't reintegrate someone into society if there's no society to be reintegrated into. And it's a lot harder if they're in remote regions which have the presence of armed groups, or which have the presence, for example, in Colombia, of illegal crops or of illegal mining. So what we try to do is, first we try to get people to a place where they can actually be reintegrated. As I mentioned earlier, we have 32,000 people in the program, are in 740 of Colombia's 1,100 municipalities, but about 90% of them, or 80% of them, are concentrated in 100 municipalities. So there is a high level of concentration of people in certain municipalities. 40% of them are concentrated in 9 municipalities. So that's part of the answer. The other part is for people, we still can't tell people not to go wherever they want. Colombia is a democracy. There's freedom of movement. And when people leave these groups, they essentially become normal Colombian citizens, and their only commitment is to never go back to any sort of criminal activity. So what we'll try to do is that if somebody goes, back to their hometown or to a remote area, we'll try to identify what that person wants to do, and maybe they want to work as farmers, or they want to work in agriculture, or they want to have a store in a small town. So then what we do is that we educate them, we prepare them to go back to that town. We also do community work with people in that town if they know that the person is demobilized. If they don't know, if it's only one person, they live in a town, of 100 or 200 or 2,000, well, we're not going to blow their cover, if you will. It's not necessary, but we'll still have them do social service. For example, we'll work with the local parish, or we'll work with a local victims group, and we'll just do it very discreetly so that we don't affect the person's reintegration process. And then what we do is that we'll train the person, or we'll prepare them so that they can start their own businesses. They won't necessarily be employed, but we can prepare them to start their own a small store, or maybe they can, if they want to go into farming again, we'll help them, we'll get them vocational training so that they can be better farmers. We'll just try to get them on their feet. In some places that we have done like communal or collective reintegration. There's a town, for example, in the northern Cauca state. Cauca is in southern Colombia. It's really a hotbed of all sorts of conflict. There's a lot of FARC there today. There's actually a community which is very close to the point where Alfonso Cano, the FARC commander, was killed in 2011, where he was tracked down by the armed forces. And this town, they're in the middle of the FARC heartland, or of a FARC-controlled area. And in the 1990s, early 1990s, the FARC kept on forcibly recruiting their children. So the whole town, they armed themselves, and they set up what's called as a campesino defense force, self-defense force, which is like a type of autodefensa, of a self-defense force, but they weren't necessarily affiliated with the AUC. They still, however, what they wanted to do, they wanted to stop the FARC from taking their children, but also once before they armed, the FARC tried to take their children, and they didn't let them, so they killed 12 of the townspeople for not allowing it. They perpetrated a massacre. So what they did is that they armed themselves, and they started to plant coca so that they could sell that to buy more weapons, and they just protected themselves. But essentially the whole town mobilized to resist the FARC. So what we did with them when they demobilized in 2003 is that we started a process of reintegrating the whole community. And what we found is, the community, I don't remember the size, but it must like 600 or 800 people, out of which 150 had been mobilized into this armed group, which was of the town, by the town, made up of community members. But what we found is that there was still a lot of friction between community members and the people who were actually in the armed group, because at the end of the day, it's still an armed group, and they were still taking their children or recruiting other townspeople. So what we did, and also the whole town was planted in coca. So what we did is that we did a process with the town, which lasted for about 5 years. And in this process, we managed to eradicate over 400 hectares of coca leaf. Today we helped them to plant 85,000 coffee plants. So now that they've gone from a coca producing town to a coffee producing town. We did a lot of reconciliation work with members of the town. We taught people how to become better farmers for their coffee plants, but we also taught the townspeople, the people who lived within the village, to be shopkeepers, or to be able, for example, there's people that work with textiles to make uniforms for the people who work in the farms, or things like that. So we, in other words, we didn't get people to leave. We just helped them to better develop their town. We didn't do that, the ACR, by ourselves. What we do, the way that we work in one of these situations, is that we facilitate and make sure that the different actors that have to play a role go there. So, for example, for the eradication and replanting with coffee plants, we worked with the Colombian National Federation of Coffee Growers. for formalizing the land that they were on. We got them all titles for their land because it was an old illegal settlement, or not illegal, it was like a colonial settlement from, you know, way back. We managed to get them titles for their land. We did that working with the Ministry of Agriculture. We trained people to become better coffee farmers and to become better shop owners or whatever with SENA, which is the National Vocational Training School. So the way that we work is that we don't do the work ourselves. The only work that we do ourselves is the psychological attention. But for everything else, we do an analysis of what we have to do, and then we bring in the relevant players and have everybody do their work.
My name is Pepe Kothar. I'm just a friend of Colombo. The question I have is, thank you. I know that when we were reading about the violence in Colombia in the 80s and 90s, a lot of it became part of the drug culture. So now when these people are demobilizing, how do you discern where it's an ideological case or whether it was a commercial case out of the drug wars?
It's very difficult. And it's not just, nowadays it's not just the drug war, it's also extortion, it's also illegal mining, they become more like criminal gangs. But I think, you know, we're closing this chapter in Colombian history. It's very hard to draw the line, so we just give them the benefit of the doubt, if you will. So if people are, that's why if you look at people who can demobilize today, before in Colombia there were essentially three bands, the AUC, the FARC, and the ELN. Those were the three bands that could demobilize. The AUC had their shot between 2003 and 2006. After peace talks with the AUC were done, that door was shut. Today it's only FARC and ELN, so they've been demobilizing since 2003. But if you look, for example, at the spoiler groups, the criminal bands that emerged after the AUC came out, they can't come into this program. Their shot, I mean, it's done. Now they're just treated strictly as a criminal phenomenon. And then, you know, that's, we just need to start closing chapters in history. But I would say that once the FARC and ELN are demobilized, this door will also be shut. You need to close DDR at some point because otherwise you'll just start recycling criminals.
Marlon Madsen from Weill Cornell Medical College. With this reintegration, you really learn from other countries and other programs, but you mentioned Korea, South Korea. And I'd be interested in hearing more because there was attention to psychological trauma, and somehow this was an important learning area for Colombia.
Right. I think, the South Korean experience, it was really a long shot, but it was actually interesting. The thing is that if you look at South Korea, you're taking people who are coming from North Korea, which is a totalitarian regime, people who have been brainwashed since they were kids, or not brainwashed, educated, I guess you could call it, because it's a country. But that since they were kids, that leaving the country is betrayal, and that you know that the Kim family are basically deities, and that you can't betray them, and that and it's a population that's very much abused in many ways, you know, by the regime. So when people get to South Korea and they live in a completely different society, you know, we wouldn't understand. If we go to North Korea, we wouldn't understand it. You know, I think it's even more strict than the Soviet Union or than East Germany ever were. But when they get into South Korea, they have to relearn the ropes. You know, they have a lot of psychological attention that they need because of the trauma that they may have lived while they were in the regime, or even if they had no trauma, just the trauma of the guilt feeling that they get because they've betrayed their society. They have to learn they have to debunk a bunch of lies that they've been told, like for example that South Korea is a hoax and that South Korea doesn't work properly. They have to learn how South Korean society works. They have to learn how to use a cell phone. They have to learn how to use an ATM. They have to learn how to coexist with people whom they've been brought up to believe are their enemies. And if you think about it, that's actually very similar to what we get from people coming out of the FARC or from the ELN. Somebody's been in these groups from the ages of 12 to 14. That means that they're Colombians, but they haven't really lived in Colombia. They've been living in a parallel society, which is called the FARC or the ELN. And it's a society where you don't make decisions for yourself, where your commanders tell you what you have to do. And it's a society where you can't speak freely, because if you speak freely and you speak your mind, you can get killed. And it's a society where they've been told that the rest of Colombians, that we're animals and that we're going to torture them and kill them and treat them badly if they turn themselves in. So if you look at the similarities, they're there. So essentially when they gamble it all and they play, they bet it all on black and they say, fine, I'm going to risk my life and see what happens, and they get to Colombian society, they also have a lot of the same feelings of, they have to learn how this society functions, and they have to debunk a bunch of myths that they've been told that we're going to treat them badly, and they have to get past the guilty feeling because they've also been told since they were kids that if they left, it was a huge betrayal and that it was the worst crime that they could commit against the organization. So with the South Korean experience, it's also interesting because Colombia is not a failed state. Colombia is a high-level, middle-income country, so we have a lot of resources. When you look at other DDR countries, usually they don't have the same capabilities that we have. When I tell other DDR directors that we spend $2,500 per person per year for 7 years, they say that that's a luxury. They usually spend $400 per person for 6 months or for a year and a half, and that's it because there's no more money to give them. So while Colombia is not as rich as South Korea, we do have the means to be a little bit more sophisticated about how we implement our program. And if you look at the way the South Korean program works, what they do is they have this reintegration center or this arrival center, which is similar to our initial halfway houses where people arrive. And there people get medical checkups. They get academic profiles are done for each person. They start getting psychological attention, and then after a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, they go out into society with a government stipend, and they start working with local government, or they start being tended to by programs that are led by local or regional government. In Colombia, we have something that's very similar. In Colombia, people are in halfway houses for 2 or 3 months, then they start getting a government stipend, and they go back out into society, and we have to work very closely with local and regional officials because we have, there is a local and regional government presence. So there are lessons to be learned both in the things that we do with the people, the rehabilitation of people who go through these programs, but from our perspective, there's also a lot to be learned from the way that they actually implement the program, which is in a highly decentralized manner. This program, the Colombian program, 10 years ago, it was managed in a highly centralized manner, which means everything was decided from Bogota. And the reason for that is that most people were in Bogota. But when you have people in over 700 municipalities, you can't keep deciding everything from Bogota, especially in a country as large as Colombia. We need to continue decentralizing. And what drew our attention the most from the South Korean model was how decentralized it is. And that's something that we're working, striving for in Colombia.
And if I may add, the former combatants have to learn to live in society, but the Colombian society has also a big part in learning to live with them.
Yeah, it has to go both ways, but that's also something that happens in South Korea as well. It's speaking again about the South Korean experience. Another thing is that like I mentioned earlier, Colombian society has changed a lot. When people went into these groups at the age of 12, 14 years ago, life was very different in Colombia. 14 years ago, Colombia was a completely different country. The year 2000 was when the Caguán was around. The year 2000 was when Colombia, the guerrillas would take over 250 towns a year or something like that. They would kidnap 3,000 people on a yearly basis. It was a completely different country. Colombia today is something else.
Do you have any more questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Camila. I'm a student here in sociology and also I've worked as a journalist in Colombia. I was wondering, going back to La Habana, what the FARC are asking for demobilizing and also reintegrating is political participation. And I was wondering if, since there have been a lot of people from the FARC who have already demobilized, if the office, the ACR, has any kind of program or special policy regarding political participation. And if I may also ask a second question, I was wondering if, since there are many soldiers who were perpetrators, were also victims, with the entrance of the victims law in 2011, there has been like a the possibility for someone to participate in the ACR program, but also as well in the victims' law reparations?
Okay. To the second question, no, because the victims' law specifically says that people who have been members of illegal armed groups will not be considered victims, except those that are demobilized under the age of 18. Those are the only ones that would be considered victims. And as far as the second question, we've identified over 100 people in the people who have been reintegrated that have participated in politics. They've done everything from being city councilmen to being deputies in provincial assemblies to being, we've had a couple of mayors. We've had a FARC mayor for the Conservative Party. We've had AUC city councilman for the left-wing Polo Democrático. So when people leave their groups, they do participate in politics, but they participate in the politics that they see fit. We have, we have demobilized guerrillas in right-wing parties. We have demobilized paramilitaries in left-wing parties, which defeats reason for many people. So, but we have done it. We have no policy. We don't promote political participation, but we don't block it either. They're citizens, they can do whatever they want. What we do in the process is that we have a citizenship training component to the reintegration program, where we teach them how Colombian democracy works, where we teach them how you're a better citizen, where we even teach them simple things like crossing the road and how a traffic light works, because a lot of people have never seen a traffic light before. But in any case, we don't stop it, but we don't promote it either, and it does happen.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Lynn Enriquez. I work for DirecTV Latin America, which is a pay TV provider with presence in Colombia.
I'm one of your happy customers.
Thank you so much. And my question is, by which means or ways does...
For example, DirecTV has a very large call center in Cali, Colombia.
Yeah.
We have a lot of ex-combatants working in call centers. It'd be wonderful if we could work with DirecTV in Cali to see if we could get some ex-combatants employed. You probably already have some, I'm not sure, but I'm sure you do, because you have hundreds of people working there. But that's something that's one of the employment possibilities that have been the most effective, because it's low-skilled training, and because they're just easily accepted. It's just the person with the phone, and that's it.
And basically, that was my question. By which means or ways can private companies better serve the ACR's objectives, besides job opportunities?
If you want, we can talk as soon as this is over. We work with many companies, and there's many ways. The only way isn't just employing people directly. For example, with Bavaria, which is the big beer company in Colombia, they wanted to help us, but they were reluctant to hire people into their workforce. So what they did is that they identified what products they took in, they consumed essentially to manufacture their beer, and or in their production process. And what they identified were the wooden pallets that they used to store the beer cases in their warehouses, and they have to buy a lot of wooden pallets every year. And basically, they said that if we conformed a company made up of ex-combatants, which produced these wooden pallets, and they were of the quality that they could find elsewhere in the market and at a competitive price, that they would buy their pallets from the demobilized person's company instead of buying them out in the market. So we set up we teamed up with USAID and with Fundación Carvajal, which is a corporate foundation in Cali, and we got a group of about 20 ex-combatants. We put them together, and we taught them how to make wooden pallets, and they started to make these pallets with the conditions that Bavaria said. And long story short, today they're wooden pallet providers to much of the industry in Cali, and they have sales of about $500,000 or $600,000 per year. So it's like a real deal company. It's a real industry. That model worked quite well, and we're using it now. We've done it also with other companies, with other manufacturing companies that outsource part of their production. And we've started other companies with ex-combatants, and sometimes with ex-combatants and community members, so that they can become providers for larger industrial companies. We've also done it in the commercial sector. There's a guild which is called FENALCO in Colombia, which is like a commercial guild in Colombia, and we worked with them because we saw that many ex-combatants had stores. That was their productive project. They all get a seed capital, and many of them use it to set up their own businesses, and they would set up stores. So what we did with FENALCO is that we set up a franchise system through which they would all set up their own stores, but they would share a name, and they would share a corporate image, and they would share cost structures, for example, when they buy inventory. Currently, we have 6 of these stores. They're called dos por tres, two by three, which means quickly in Colombian, I guess. And they have these stores which are usually owned by between 3 and 4 ex-combatants, but they're managed by a professional manager who's hired by FENALCO until the stores get on their feet. The system with the wooden pallets and other similar industrial providers to bigger companies, they're also set up in that way, where you have the ex-combatants working, but you hire a professional manager, and that's the key, because you can't expect someone who came out of the jungle to be a business manager right off the bat. That's very difficult. So you hire professional managers, and you need a partner, like a strong partner who can help to carry the process forward. In the industrial sector, we've been doing it with Fundación Corona. In the commercial sector, we do it with FENALCO. But that's a format that we've been replicating, which has proven to be quite successful. But for example, with DirecTV, first of all, I guarantee you that you have ex-combatants working for you in Colombia, because you have hundreds of employees, if not thousands, in Colombia. But the best type of work for them is in call centers. So if that's something that we could work out, that would be great.
And this is the perfect platform for you to transmit that message.
One last question.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry.
Thank you. My name is Andres Quintero. I'm a Colombia student here at New York City. My question goes regarding DDR and how you've been approaching this kind of issues. Basically, DDR programs are really male-oriented. Sometimes there's a big gap for female opportunities, and how DDR programs go focused to attend female ex-combatants' necessities. That are totally different from the ones from the male combatants, if you can see it that way. And in Colombia, it's clearly a macho society that has been reinforced and things like that behind. And the second one is regarding that difficulty that you have to experience when you're working with ex-combatants, and the picture of those that were victims and how they describe themselves in order to readapt to that ex-combatant. Let me refigure the picture. It's like, with the changing the laws in Colombia, all the displaced people now felt that they have left behind all these ex-combatant benefits, and they have been left behind. So they're very reluctant that the people with guns have been now rewarded, and now that they have been forgotten, and they have been making a struggle to make.
How do we manage? You mean, how can we help ex-combatants and more than we help victims, essentially?
Well, it's not only your office, no, it's that part of the coordination thing that you were talking at the beginning, how difficult it is to handle that in Colombia when we were so proud to have, we were the first country with more internally displaced people for almost 15 years. Then now we don't even mention that we have this internally displaced people, now we have victims. And that change of language have made a lot of struggles when you're trying to apply programs like the reintegration program.
Right, but I don't understand the question.
How can you handle that to make it more sustainable in the future? Because part of what we have seen. How do you handle which part? Demobilized and victims. In this case, victims usually called internally displaced people. You
How do you handle the relationship between the demobilized and the victims?
Because you're talking about 700 municipalities, and less or so the same number of municipalities that were displaced or have suffered that kind of phenomenon.
Okay, could you remind me the first question again?
Yeah, but I think it's basically what you have been
Female and
explaining.
female approaches
Oh, yeah,
to the...
okay.
to
The female, there is a gender approach to DDR, and it's a gender approach which focuses on special programs, not just for females, but also, in the case of men, looking for issues of masculine identity and machismo, you know, trying to redefine that, because it's also making sure that when they marry and they go home, they're also better husbands, and that there's a fairer vision of the male role and the female role in the family. So that does exist, and we developed it during 2 years with Swedish technical cooperation. For 2 years we had someone embedded from Sweden within our team to help us redesign the whole gender approach. And the gender approach also looks at homosexual and transsexual ex-combatants, of which there are many, and they also have special needs. You know, we have one person who actually had a sex change operation, who arrived as Jorge and is today Karen. So, and that happens as well. As far as your second question, I mean, I think that's one of the careful balancing acts that we're going to have to carry going forward in Colombia for the rest of this generation, for the rest of our lives, at least for the next 15 or 20 years. That's how do you balance the difference between a victim and a victimizer? And I think, I mean, a short answer to that is that they're not the same thing. They're different. They need to work together. There need to be spaces where they meet. There need to be spaces where they can reconcile. But there's also different objectives when you reintegrate someone and when you repair a victim. When you repair a victim, or when you work with a victim, is to restore that person at least restore as much as you can of their normality prior to their being victimized. You know, whether it be getting them their land back, or repairing them because they had a family member killed, or allowing them to learn the truth about what happened to themselves or to their families. So that's one part with the victims. With the ex-combatants, you're trying to reintegrate these people into society, first and foremost, so they don't go back to violence, you know, so that they stay in legality, and so that you can do the most important thing in transitional justice, which is guarantee the right of non-repetition to the victims and to the rest of society. So they're not really comparable programs in that, oh, well, why do you give so much to ex-combatants and you don't give so much to victims? They're different type of policies that are trying to achieve different things. This is not a reward for ex-combatants either. It's an opportunity to come back into society and to live in society and to live in legality. This also is not a policy which is focused primarily on ex-combatants. Yes, it benefits them directly, but this is a peace and security policy which is focused on guaranteeing peace to Colombians at large. That's how success is measured in this policy. How do we do that? By working with ex-combatants, because that's what we have to do. But that's, I think it's very important to understand the perspective.
Thank you, Alejandro. We are going to wrap up, but you leave us with a really relevant message here at the Council of the Americas, that is a business organization with 200 members, and it's the need for the private sector, not just in Colombia, but multinational, to engage with this process, and I'm sure that's a dialogue that you will be able to continue with them. Thank you very much for coming today to share your experience with us. Thank you to our brave public, and have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.